Hello and welcome to our first Green Dragon podcast. I'm your host, Aiden, and I'm joined by my hosts as well, Tom and Jake. Tom and Jake, do you want to introduce yourselves?
My name's Tom Tisnick, and uh, Aiden, Jake, and I got together a little while ago and thought that it'd be really awesome to start a podcast. We start talking about things that are important to us as Americans, and so here we are.
Yeah, yeah. Jake, you online?
Yeah, like Tom said, join this podcast in order to discuss the principles, that of freedom that we are can maybe take for granted.
I think the reason we chose the name the Green Dragon podcast is as we're going through a lot of the stories of the founding fathers and the stories of the starting of our country. One of the things we came across was this name of a tavern, and this tavern was called the Green Dragon Tavern. And the Green Dragon Tavern was a place where the founding fathers and the people, that founded this great nation, they got together and they shared ideas with each other, and these ideas gave birth to the idea of America, the idea of the revolution. And we believe that it's through these sharing of ideas that we can continue to make our country great. And obviously, in the last, you know, 20 years, I would say, there's been a push to centralize power, centralize the sharing of ideas, and take it away from the people when it was the intention of the founding fathers for, you know, every citizen of the United States of America to be involved in the decision making in this country. So the more we become, and the more our government becomes, kind of centralized, and the decisions are taken away from the people, the more we see an imbalance in power. And so, in order to give power back to the people, we believe that it's um, our duty as American citizens to be able to share ideas. And I think a great way to do that in 2022 is through a podcast. And we see this, all over across the board. We see, people like Joe Rogan and Ed Milet that have fantastic podcasts that, share great ideas. And we thought, well, why not? Why not start a podcast that's based around the founding fathers' principles, and bring the conversations, that should be had by the citizens of America back to the citizens of America. So I think our goal, and maybe you guys can chime in on this. I think our goal with this podcast is to bring those conversations about, to have those discussions, to have discussions with other people, um, in order to rediscover what it means to be Americans, and how we can all kind of participate in um, the idea of American freedom.
Well
Yeah, I
said,
like that
Aiden.
you touched. Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying that that's well said, especially since, um, you know, in our generation, we're kind of the young patriots who have the duty and responsibility to carry that banner
Hmm.
that our founding fathers gave us. Um, and so I think it's really important that we understand what red, white, and blue really means.
Mm-hmm.
And all of our ancestors, in a way, that fought for this freedom for the past 250 years, and it's something that so many millions of people have fought for and defended. And it shows the real value, I think, of what freedom really means.
Mhm, mhm.
And so, and we can only really come to know that freedom and what it means through discussion, because discussion is the sharing of ideas to find truth.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And actually the day we're recording this is September 13th, 2022. So it's just 2 days after the memorial 9/11. I think one of the things that struck me this year especially as years past. You see a lot of posts for 9/11 and in remembrance of that tragic day, and and I think especially I would say probably the first 10 years after 9/11, there was a lot of patriotism. Um, there was a lot of camaraderie. There was a lot of rallying, together and remembrance of that day. And I think the patriotism displayed on that day was something we hadn't seen in a really long time before that. Um, but as a new generation has kind of come in to you know, be I would say probably the main participators in the population, especially through social media. A lot of them didn't live through 9/11 or were just born around right before 9/11. So I don't think a lot of them understand, the devastation that caused, but also um, the the feeling of togetherness that the American people had in those days surrounding 9/11, the feeling of patriotism in this country. And I think that's something that in 2022 is quite lost. I would say as a nation currently, we're quite divided. So I think it's important, no matter what political background you come from, no matter, you know, what race, religion, it doesn't matter. We're all Americans. And that's what the founding fathers, wanted us to realize when they were, founding this great nation is that we're all here. We're all Americans, no matter what background we come from. And we all should have equal opportunity and we should all work together. So I think that's another important note to drive home is that, everybody is welcome in America. We just have to work together to make this nation great because the more divided we are, the quicker we'll fall. So, yeah.
I
Um,
agree. Yeah, I would say 20 years ago, there was definitely a lot less emphasis on partisanship.
mhm,
After you watch the videos of the first responders and
mhm,
even George Bush at the time, we weren't speaking in a um, partisan manner or searching to blame one party for one party or another for what happened. It was
mhm.
more like everyone was Americans. He wasn't speaking only to those that he or those in the country that he thought could have prevented it or
Yeah.
um, just a very, very unifying time. And it was inspiring to see how they took a tragic situation like that
Mhm.
and used it to make the nation stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that if I think, at the point in time we are today, I think if we want to, you know, fix a lot of the issues that are going on in this country, a stronger emphasis on being American rather than Republican, Democrat, or whatever, I think is truly important because, nothing. I mean, at the end of the day, there's always going to be a 50-50 split or something close to that in this nation as far as your political beliefs. And so if everybody split 50-50, then we might as well just you know split up the country 50-50 and start two new countries, right? That wasn't the purpose. And and so I think, we have to work together. Um, we have to compromise on certain things and know when to compromise and know when to not compromise, depending on, what the situation requires. Um, but I think with all that being said, I think I'm really excited about this podcast because I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to share information with you, the listeners, um, to get people on that share these same kind of ideals that our founding fathers had for this nation, to get people on with different ideas, to be able to share those ideas with you so you can learn something new, so you can implement it in your life, so you can, prepare for your future um, as well as, stay up to date with what's going on with current policies in the government, because it seems like every day there's a new bill where they're trying to, whether it's sending another $1 billion off to some other foreign country like Ukraine, putting us another billion into debt, and kind of hanging that over our heads as citizens. You want to stay on top of that stuff too, and not only focus. You want to be able to focus on the present, but also implement the things from the past that we've learned over the last 200 plus years, right? I think that's forgotten a lot too. Is like people forget that uh, we've even though we've had a comparatively to a lot of other nations a short history time wise, we've had a lot happen and we have a lot that we can learn from. We just have to remember all the things we learned from and not forget about them after 5, 10 years,
Yeah, 100%.
but yeah, I think in general, I think our podcast will run in kind of three separate segments. I think we'll kind of have an introduction to every podcast. Um, we'll also, I think, try to always give you guys a quick rundown of what's going on currently, politically, geopolitically, just to keep you up to date with any new bills that have been passed in the US, regarding, whether it's, a new spending bill, whether it's a new bill regarding your rights, whether it's Second Amendment, whatever it might be. Keep you up to date to those things, because those are really important things as citizens to understand what's happening in the government, what the government's, what the people that are supposed to be representing you are doing. And then also, geopolitically, so you can kind of understand where we're at as the United States in the world stage, because that's becoming more and more important, I would say. Things are heating up across the globe. We've got a war going on between Ukraine and Russia right now, a potential war going on between Taiwan and China. The Taiwanese are preparing to fight back against the Chinese. The Chinese are ramping up their armies and making alliances with China or Russia. So I mean, there's a lot going on geopolitically too, and it's important to understand. I think all those things as well, just so you can, make the best plans you can for your future. So we'll try to cover that, and I think our second little segment of our podcast, and then to kind of hit on our main topic, we'll always try to have one main topic for the podcast. Today we'll be speaking about the Second Amendment and why that is important as Americans. But it might, I would say, guys, maybe you could chime in on this, but I would say we'll try to cover a wide range of topics, whether it's Second Amendment news, whether it's getting a guest on to speak about cryptocurrency, whatever it might be. I don't know if you guys have any other things to add in. I'm kind of blanking at the moment on other topics, but maybe you guys have some ideas.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we were talking about before, like understanding our American identity,
Hmm.
like what we've built in our history, and then what that forms us as people living in the world, and the different characteristics of that, and then things about our history, um, just the ideas and the mentality of an American versus another person in the world. Um, and I think also we were talking about um, different things that we can see that will help the future a lot. Um, so those are the few things that were coming to mind to me.
Yeah, I think we've got a lot that we want to talk about, so we'll try to. I think we'll try to cover one thing in as much depth as we can in 30 minutes, and then if we need to bring it back on for a part two to cover more on it, I think we will, because there's just some things you just can't get through in 30 minutes time, and
Yeah.
but yeah. I don't know. Today I was scrolling through Instagram, which I got off for a while, and then I got back on, and one of the things that stood out to me today, and kind of current events and current news, um, was this idea of quiet quitting, and it made me kind of chuckle, but it also kind of made me, scared for the future, because so apparently quiet quitting is this coined term for not really quitting your job, but instead, kind of half-assing it, or not really trying as hard as you should, not putting forth your best effort. And I thought to myself, this nation was founded on people that definitely didn't half-ass anything, and they put their best foot forward. They really put in the time and effort to do things. Everybody that's done great things in this nation, if you look at, you know immigrants, whether it's Irish immigrants, Chinese immigrants, you know Italian immigrants, all of them have, all the ones that have worked their way to the top have put in a lot of hard work and effort. They didn't just work a 9 to 5 and say, oh, it's 5 p.m., shut it down for the day. No, they kept working. Some worked 2, 3, 4 jobs, you know worked 23, maybe 24 hours a day, got a little bit of sleep in the cab while they were driving the cab, from ride to ride. And you look at those people, and it made me wonder, where would our nation be if we had this idea of quiet quitting when we first started? Would we even have made it past something like the Boston Tea Party? Would we even have attempted the Boston Tea Party if everybody involved, was a quiet quitter? Would we have, gone, and fought against a tyrannical government at the time, the British, the king? And I would argue no, probably not. I don't think, if we all had this, quiet quitting mentality, we probably, I don't know where we'd be at. I don't even want to think about it, because I just, I think the great thing about America, at least from my perspective, is that anybody, no matter, where you start in life, you have an opportunity to do something great, and that comes through hard work. And that's the only way to success, is through hard work and dedication. And so this idea now that quiet quitting will get you somewhere, and a lot of people argue it's for mental health and all these other things. I think it's just because we've turned into a soft bunch of lazy bums. Quite honestly, I think there's just too many people that want to be handed things nowadays. I don't know what you guys think about this. It got me really heated when I read it. It started off as kind of like, oh, that's kind of funny, and then I started thinking about it. I was like, wow, this is really crazy. But yeah, it was something today. I was like, I can't imagine if our next generation gets this instilled to them, that they can just be a quiet quitter and do the bare minimum to get by in life. Where are we going to be at in 20 years? I don't know. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. I had to rant about it a little bit. It
Yeah.
popped up in my
Mm,
news feed today, and I was like, ooh, I know what I'm starting the podcast with.
yeah. No, I think it is definitely a symptom of the instant gratification culture that we
Mm,
live in, where whatever produces the most pleasant emotion sensations in as little amount of time as possible
hmm,
is the right way according to society.
yeah,
So an example of that could be TikTok. You're scrolling through videos, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody else, but um you don't like a video, you scroll the next one, and then just keep on going and going until you find one that works for you. Just that, I think, is a microcosm of that, the society in general that, like I said, has that attitude of, wanting what we want as quickly as possible, right when it comes into our mind,
hmm,
and tying back into the workplace. If there's something that doesn't make you feel that way, then quiet quit. Don't don't do it.
yeah.
you know so That's just, yeah,
Yeah,
I agree
I
though that it is a problem.
yeah, I totally agree with you. I think something that's interesting there, you talked about instant gratification. I think like if you look at the last 10 years, especially with the advent, or I guess the more the more utilization we have with social media, um, things like streaming services where everything's on demand, whenever you want, click of a button, you go and binge a TV show, all this. We become very focused as a country, I think, on entertainment. And I feel like entertainment, especially, we were looked at in America as, I would say, probably since like the 1930s or 40s, as the entertainment like mogul of the world. Like the US has always had the best movies, the best musicians. I mean, we kind of have had always had the best of everything. Other countries love our music, other countries, and this isn't like a we're the best type thing, but like we've been looked at for all these years as kind of the entertainment moguls of the world. And I think something that's interesting about that is it's definitely more so now than it was 20 years ago with the advent of the internet and all that. But I think something that's interesting is you look at society, and I think this leads into that instant gratification you're talking about. And one of the problems with that is, as a society, we become completely focused on entertainment. And I forget where I heard this, and I'll have to do my research, and maybe I'll put it in the show notes if I can find it. I think it might have been in a book that I read. But it was talking about the Roman Empire, and when you know the Roman Empire at its peak, um, right before its fall, became very focused on entertainment. And it was kind of different from what they've been focused on for years and years and years. They had always been focused on innovation. They were ahead of their time with water transportation, with the aqueducts and all this. I mean, they were, really pioneers at their time of you know, architecture and art and music and all these different things, and engineering. I mean, they really were the best of the best at the time, and then they became extremely focused on entertainment and instant gratification. And you see this like during the time period of Nero with the Colosseum and the gladiators and all this stuff. And that was right before the fall of Rome, because they became and so engaged, so addicted to this entertainment, this instant gratification, they completely lost sight of what made them great, which was innovation. And as soon as they lost sight of innovation, I mean, they just kind of they gave. I mean, in a sense, they gave up without knowing, right? Like they kind of they definitely let others, get ahead in the race. And I think you're seeing a lot of the same things. If we look to other countries, America used to have the best of the best, automobiles, everything, right? Technology. But if you look at, what China's doing nowadays, I mean, it's absolutely insane. And they're not always doing it in the right way. A lot of times they're stealing our information through platforms like TikTok, and they're stealing all that information, and they're using it to develop things twice as fast as we are. And so, they're kind of playing by their own rules. But at the end of the day, I think as a society, I think we've completely lost focus on what's made us, for 150 years, the greatest nation on the planet, right? Greatest civilization, arguably of all time. I mean, if you think about America and what we've been able to achieve in our very short, comparatively, history. I mean, it's absolutely. I mean, we are the greatest nation ever in history, just from a pure, innovation standpoint. What we've been able to do in this, even the last 100 years is absolutely insane. So, that was something I just kind of thought of. I was like, I think what you're talking about with instant gratification, I think the thing that's lost there is everybody's so focused on entertaining themselves that we've completely lost focus of working at developing new things. and developing new technologies and the next best thing. And there are people out there that do it. It's just I think it's less of the population because we're less willing to work because we're more concerned about what's on TikTok.
Yeah. Well, it's sad to see because you think about where America started from. We all came here on boats, across the sea, and
Hmm.
we didn't have anything, so we had to start from scratch. And it still is like I think very prominent in how like if you're gonna start something, you have to start from scratch. Like
Hmm.
you're setting up this podcast or other business ventures. It's like you have to have an idea, then you have to find the resources, then you have to put the work in to make it happen. Um, and so that naivete of just saying, "Oh, I can just sit back and things will happen," isn't true, and it robs the individual of the uh, reward of work.
Hmm.
So they don't see the good that they could do through their own hands, and then it robs other people that they're like connected to in life of the good that they could have gotten from their hard work. And
Exactly.
so like the reason America has been so strong is because we've all been very willing to work very hard, long hours, use our minds in ways that we would normally think about it. We have like a very out of the box, innovative mindset. Um, and I don't know, I think I mean, I wouldn't want to lose that. I mean, I think all of us could say for sure that working every day is much more rewarding than just taking it easy. Like
Hmm. Hmm.
you feel like you can only really rest after you worked hard.
Hmm.
Like
Exactly.
the athletes I've noticed are the best people who rest after the workout are usually the ones who did the most reps.
Hmm. Exactly. Yeah, I think there's something ultimate really. I mean, I think it comes down to the reward of it because I mean, if you're just taking your rest for granted if you haven't actually put in the effort. You don't actually understand the idea of resting if you're always resting, right? If you're always lazy, then you're not gonna. I mean, you're always. I mean, you're quite honestly always resting. Um, and yeah, no, yeah, I agree. I think it's a disease. I think it's a disease of the mind that's penetrated itself into our psyches in this country, and it continues to get passed down. And I think it stems from people that aren't forced to work hard for things, and I guess that's one of the things with not really understanding you know what it means to earn a dollar or being given things by the government, whatever it might be, right? And those things all lead to the deterioration of a work ethic. Um, I was listening to this guy talk today, and he's a bodybuilder, and he's got a uh, shout out to Seth Ferosi. He's a owner of a company. I think they're based out of Pittsburgh, and his brand is all based around this idea of HWMF, and it stands for hardworking motherfucker, which I think is kind of badass. And I like it because everything he does and preaches is you have to put in the work. Whether it was him doing bodybuilding or him starting a business, it's all this idea is he says he's in the business of building bad MFers, which I love, and hardworking MFers, which I think is great because that's what started this nation. That's what made this nation great, and that's what I think will continue to to keep this nation going. And if we don't have enough of them, then I hate to say it, but I think the outlook for the United States of America isn't too great. We have to have people that are willing to put in put in the work, get their hands dirty a little bit, and get stuff done.
Yeah, it is interesting too, just to think that, as you mentioned earlier, Aiden, regarding the Romans and how they face the same issues of complacency that we
Hmm.
are seeing now in our country. Um, they say the phrase history repeats itself. I mean, I'm a big believer in that we kind of go through cycles,
Absolutely.
especially in terms of prosperity.
Hmm. Yeah, I always say that you know, countries might change, but people never change, and you kind of get that sense. I mean, like you said, history repeats itself. The the name of the country might change, but at the end of the day, every nation that's been great has fallen up until this point. I mean, look at the British Empire, for instance. The British Empire, you know, just about what a little over 100 years ago, stretched literally across the globe, and now they're sequestered to a tiny little island, basically. And so I mean, it just shows you how quickly you can go from being the world's largest influence, the world's largest superpower, to basically nothing. Um, but it also shows you how quickly you know your freedoms can disappear as well. If you look at a lot of these countries, overnight taken over by a rivalry country, especially in the Middle East, I would say. Governments toppled, and citizens are kind of in this state of upheaval, and unfortunately, a lot of times they lose every not only their rights you know that they've been given by their government, but also just basic human rights. If you look at a lot of these Middle Eastern countries and the things that happen in there, and it happens overnight. So I think that's another thing too, is like a lot of the freedoms that we've been given, we can't take for granted. We have to fight for, because if we just let them to fall to the wayside and kind of forget about them and just take them for granted, like I would say 99% of us do, then they disappear. It might happen slowly over time as the government takes more and more control, or it might happen, in the case of an invasion. It just kind of depends. But either way, if you take for granted what you have and you don't appreciate it, you don't fight for it, it will eventually disappear. I mean, inevitably. So I think that's kind of the foresight that the founding fathers had, and making a bit of a transition here, but kind of leading into this. I think that's the foresight they had for um, a lot of the rights that they gave us in the Constitution, whether it's free speech or the Second Amendment, and in the Constitution. I think it's important to realize, was it made to tell the people what rights they could have, but it was actually a limitation on what the government could and couldn't do. And the only reason that was the case, and that's the only reason that I think one of the main reasons, I should say, that the founding fathers did that, and we have the Constitution today, is because they came from, or they left a country that was dictated by a monarchy and was controlled by one man, and they knew, you know, the the devastation that has to a nation when one or a small group of people control everything. It takes the power away from the people. And so the Constitution was a way for them to ensure that the US, America, would stay a nation which was governed by its own people. And I think that this idea of governance was something that, I mean, it was an experiment. It had never been tried before. And in a way, it's still playing itself out. We're still seeing, you know, we're still kind of we're still in a learning phase, I would say. Because I mean we're still a young country, but I think the foresight that the founding fathers had when they drafted and and stated the Constitution. I think it's powerful even today. And if you read through it, and we can kind of go through this, I think, especially in regards to the Second Amendment, a lot of the foresight they had is really, I mean, just amazing. Um, I mean, it almost seems like it was written yesterday, not
Mhm.
200 plus years ago. So, um, yeah, I think it's important. I think a lot of people forget this too, but like I said, the Constitution wasn't made to tell the people what they could and couldn't do, but it was to tell the government what the government could and couldn't do. It was a limitation on government, um, which is kind of falling to the wayside as we speak.
Yeah, that might be a great transition into like our thoughts on the Second Amendment.
Yeah, I think there's so much I think there's so much relevance there um today. I think the Second Amendment is something we often take for granted. And I think probably a good portion of the population understands what it means, but maybe what we can do is just start by kind of reading through it. I know you guys both have a pretty awesome book that lays it all out. So maybe one of you guys could just give us like a brief like snapshot of the Second Amendment. And maybe we could just like walk through and discuss it because I think while a lot of people might know about the Second Amendment or even you know um, the First Amendment, I think a lot of people haven't actually sat there and read it. So I think it'd be kind of cool just to just read even a snippet of it real quick, just to get a sense of you know what the founding fathers were trying to get across when they wrote it.
Yeah, I got a little snippet pulled up here. I can share.
Sweet.
So it's under Article 2 of the Articles in addition to an amendment of the Constitution of the United States, and it runs a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Mm.
So lots of
Yeah,
to unpack in a little short
it'll
little sentence
yeah,
or
I know,
two there.
right? Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway from it is I think a lot of times too, especially people that are like anti Second Amendment, they'll argue, well, it's not telling, it's talking about the militia, right? And they always seem to like separate the people from the militia, but I don't think they understand really, you know, who the militia is. And if you get to that second part, I would say it's pretty clear that the militia is the people. And the militias at the time were the people. It was, a militia was just kind of a group. I mean, I don't want to say like kind of a random group of people, but I mean, it was a town militia was just people, regular people, right? It wasn't something that was very organized. It wasn't like we're talking about an institution like the U.S. Army or the National Guard or something like this. The militia was the people, and the idea was that if you have a population, if you have if all your citizens are able to possess and bear arms, they'll be able to better protect themselves and the other freedoms that they've been granted, right? And so I think that's something that's like really important that people oftentimes forget is like, you know, this isn't talking about, you know, the army. This isn't talking about a organized government run group of people. This is talking about, you, me, the average citizen. And also, what people oftentimes forget is, like I said, this isn't meant to tell us what we can and can't do as citizens. This is meant to tell the government what they can and can't do, which means if this is talking about us as citizens and our ability to carry arms, it means that the government has no business saying you can and can't carry a firearm, and or protect yourself for that matter. And it doesn't mention anything about the type of firearm. People argue, well, they were talking about muskets back then. Well, guess what? The musket, when the founding fathers wrote this, was the most high-tech firearm there was. And the people that actually fought in the Revolutionary War had better weapons um, than would have been issued by the government. This was the same thing through the Civil War too. The private individuals that came to fight the war actually had better weapons and better firearms than the government issued ones. So I think it's kind of funny when people always argue this. Well, you're not supposed to have anything that's military issued, blah 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 blah. But historically, the people that have come and it's always the common person. During the Civil War, when people fought in the Civil War, the common people when they came to fight, all those men that died, they brought their own firearm. And most of the time they were better than, what was given to them. Same thing, throughout World War One and World War Two. So I think it's kind of silly to make this argument. You know, Technology changes, so does firearm technology. So it's silly to say you can't have a AR-15 in 2022 when that's the standard, when that's the standard technology for the time. I think it's kind of funny. um but
Well,
Yeah.
that's really a good point, Aiden, because it doesn't even say firearm, it just says arm. So
that's just true. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
like whatever weapon would keep the free state.
Exactly.
And those weapons will change based upon time and place and the state and all of that.
Exactly. And I think one of the reasons that this, the Second Amendment is so important is because if you look historically, like I said, the citizens were bringing their firearms to battle. It wasn't the government providing it. So if you didn't have an armed population, I would venture to say we would have I don't want to say different outcomes to a lot of the large wars we fought in. But if you look at, I mean, like, if you didn't have an armed population, how are they supposed to, rise up and fight back against tyranny? How are they supposed to, you know, I mean, if they were bringing better firearms to battle as an average citizen than what was provided to them by the government, I mean, I don't, yeah, it's just, it seems, it seems like a silly argument to make that, for some reason, us as citizens can't own something that is also being used by the government. Because also, if we're supposed to stand up against tyranny, how does it make any sort of sense that we run around with a pump action shotgun against people that are invading our country with AK-47s or AR-15s? How are we supposed to defend our country? So I think it's kind of silly.
Yeah, that brings to mind another argument against the amendment, and one highly favored by the current president, which is that, it's like the Second Amendment is outdated, they say,
Mm-hmm.
because the government's simply too powerful now for the citizens to fight back with their nukes, F-15s, as the saying goes. What
You can't shoot
what
down
gets
an F-15 with
right,
with an AR or something like that, right?
exactly. But I
Uh,
think what gets lost in translation, in what several of the founding fathers actually stated as their interpretation of the amendment, is that it's not necessarily to be used um as a defense that would overthrow the government for certain. It's more so a right
mhm,
and a preservation of dignity, in order to, in the event of a tyrannical regime, to
mhm.
go down fighting, as opposed to simply allowing them to overrun you. So I think that's
Yeah.
another a rebuttal to that popular argument.
Yeah. No,
If that makes sense.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, I think we just watched that video, and we'll link this video because I think it's really I think it's really relevant to what we're talking about right now. But it was talking about kind of the same thing you were just saying, how a lot of people argue that the Second Amendment's outdated or been misinterpreted for the use of Second Amendment, you know, advocates and gun lobbyists and all this stuff to make money. But I think one of the quotes in there was Thomas Jefferson to James Madison, and he said that um, something along the lines of a country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are warned time to time that their people, you know, preserve the spirit of resistance. Um, and then he said something along the lines of like, "Let them take arms" or something like that. I think that's really powerful because um, I think you know, hopefully we don't see a day where we have to take up arms against the government, but I think it reminds us of our independence and hopefully our non-reliance on the government. The government, you know, is there to do or is supposed to be there to do very little. We're not supposed to rely on the government, you know.
Mhm.
We are in charge of our own protection and we are in charge of maintaining our own freedom. And that's what the Constitution's all about, right? Like that's what the founding fathers wanted. We're in charge of that. The government doesn't get to tell us how we, you know, preserve our freedom. And so I think that's the importance of the Second Amendment is because it gives every man kind of an equal power to protect themselves and protect their freedom. And, you know, without that, it kind of turns us into slaves in a certain sense because we're slave and not the sense that the government's, you know, sitting there with an iron fist and saying you must do this or you must do that, but it makes us completely reliant for their protection. It makes us completely reliant. It takes away all our freedom, all our independence, all our autonomy. um and I think that's something that's kind of crazy to think about because if let's just say for instance if tomorrow, you know, your house is, you know, broken into and an armed robber comes in and you don't have a gun, right? You can call the police, but the police aren't gonna be there for, I mean, I think the average response time in most places is like 2 minutes, right? And I'm not dogging on the police in any way, shape, or form here, but the police aren't in uh, they're there to assist you in your protection, but they're not there to 100% ensure your protection, right? Your protection is completely up to you're, you know, you're completely, or you should look at it this way as you are completely responsible for your own safety, your own protection, and the protection of those who are around you and your loved ones and your possessions, right? That's why we have castle laws. We have castle laws because, you know, it's not up to the government to be there 24/7 to protect you. It's up to you. And and that's the power that the Second Amendment gives. And I think that's why it's I think for people that want to have control, especially in our government, I think that's why it's so scary, right? Is because it gives people the freedom to be autonomous from the government. Um, so it takes away that power that they can, you know, kind of hold over our heads is, you know, we're protecting you, we're here to protect you. Well, actually, I'm in charge of my own protection. If you want to help a little bit, you can help a little bit, right? but but I'm in charge of that. That's up to me as an individual, as a citizen, and that's a God-given right, and it's not just something, you know, that our founding fathers gave us in the Constitution, but gave they codified it through the Constitution as a God-given right. So yeah, I think that's another like important point to hold is, you know, you're in charge of your own safety. Um, there's really no no way, shape, or form about that. You have to take responsibility for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that um if you guys I have a couple of quotes here. I think you really like the first one is from Jefferson talking about how we're the people are the ones that preserve our liberty.
Mm,
He says that quote, the people are the only sure lines for the preservation of our liberty. That's what he wrote to James Madison in 1787. And then John Adams, not sure the context for this quote, but he said that, quote, arms in the hands of individual citizens may be used at individual discretion for the defense of the country, the overthrow of tyranny, or in private self-defense.
hmm,
So they are saying what we're saying is that I think you said that really well, Aiden, how the government isn't here to preserve our liberty, but we
mm-hmm,
are.
mm-hmm,
And um, there's no real reason why those people elected in office have a right to say how we should defend our lives.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
It's it seems very ridiculous to think that because there's no philosophical or logical argument that would state that.
yeah,
And for them to like try to control us more is just showing the true colors of them trying to be that tyrannical force because that's a self-serving ideology that they have. And so us being able to say no, this is our lives and our freedom is so important because then it's saying that the government is here to serve us, the people, not us serve the state, which has been the biggest like difference between America and socialism and the rest of the world, because that's the people serve the state, and the state is the greatest thing. But in America, it was no, we came here to freely worship God and
mm-hmm,
to find Him in the best ways possible.
mm-hmm,
And to do that, we need to have the most freedom. And so that's why our founding fathers put these amendments in place, is because they knew that we had to have a way to defend ourselves in order to live the lives that are most conducive towards loving God and our neighbor.
yeah, yeah, very well said. Yeah, yeah, I think, you know, that might, I don't have much more to add there. That might be a good way to wrap up our thoughts here. I know that we're closing in about an hour, but I think that was perfectly said. I think that, um, you know, we as Americans have been given these gifts, um, by God, and we were lucky enough to have them codified by our founding fathers in our Constitution in a way which, um, hopefully will preserve them till, inevitably it'll happen, but until this nation falls. But it's our duty as American citizens, and I guess this is the way we should end the podcast. I think it's our duty as Americans, and in an effort to just rediscover what it means to be American, I think it's important to realize that each and every one of us has a responsibility and a duty which has been given to us to fight for, to work to preserve our rights and our freedoms. And if we want to maintain the rights and the freedoms which we've been given, um, we can't just sit there idle and take them for granted. And we really need to fight. Um, we need to work together. Actually, is a better way of putting it. We need to work together to make sure that those are freedoms that are never lost. Um, so I guess my just final thought for today is, you know, this week, I guess I know I'll be thinking about, but maybe just think about, what are some of the freedoms that you take for granted, and what are some of the ways that you can um, be a better American, be the American that you ought to be, preserve the rights that you have, and help others preserve the rights that they've been given, whether that's their Second Amendment right, whether it's the right to free speech, whatever it might be. So yeah, that's my final thoughts for today. You guys got any others?
Seems pretty good to me. Do you have anything, Jake?
No, I think just signing off, what you said about how our country is founded on the principles of loving God and neighbor. I think that's really what sets us apart from other countries. And again, as you both just touched upon, not taking that for granted is really the most important thing in this day and age.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all I got.
All right, guys. Well, signing off for today. This week, be safe. Be a good neighbor. But most importantly, be a proud American. Thanks for tuning in.
Amen.